Welcome to Think Free with Stephen
and Daniel.
Two brothers breaking down ideas and ways of thinking about this thing we call life. Unlock your mind to explore more than you ever thought possible. Think Free.
Landscape, what made you want to have this as a conversation for our podcast? What interested you about this?
Can you say that again? Because I was actually just stopping and re-recording when you started talking.
No. I'll ask it as part of what we're going to talk about. So just start it.
All right. Well, we have recently just passed January 6th. We're recording on January 16th, 2024. And for those of you in the U.S. and probably abroad, January 6th of 2021 was a big day for political unrest, I would say, political contentiousness and drama. There was what's been considered the attack on the Capitol. It's been considered the insurrection, some other terms, but generally people know when they say January 6th what we're talking about. And thought we'd spend some time just kind of breaking that down a little bit. Not so much really trying to figure out exactly what happened. I think my point talking about it would be to establish or to use as an example of the fact that it's really hard to know what happened or to even define what that means as far as what happened goes, because what happened kind of depends on who you are, where you were standing, what information you had, if you were a part of it. And then after the fact, making determinations about what happens has a lot to do with what information you have seen, have exposed to, conclusions that you made, biases you brought to it, all that sort of thing. And so I thought it'd be fun to kind of break that down because it's got such it's become such a myth in our culture. Not myth that it didn't happen, but myth that it's bigger than the events themselves because of so much that's tied to it.
It's going to live on for a long time in our history.
It will, I think so. Just like a lot like the 9/11 attacks, which I was remember that just as vividly, if not so. And there was a tremendous amount of aftermath that came out and speculation and conspiracy theories about all sorts of things. So being that the January 6th events are a little more recent and we just kind of passed an anniversary, thought it might be worth digging into.
I like it. All right. And would you say that you classify yourself as someone who's normally very interested in politics and specifically following different people and policies that are coming up or decisions? Or
I used to be. I used to take it pretty seriously. It used to be a game that I played pretty intensely. I believed in the story of politics. I was up until, I don't know, maybe a decade ago. As I became an young adult, I would listen to commentators and pundits, and mostly in the conservative Republican echo chamber of talk radio. And this was, I don't think so much cable news, but more of the talk radio and the podcasts and things like that. So I had to kind of believed the idea of playing the game that if the right people that believe the things that I did about the way that the country should be governed got into office, then life would be better. And eventually got disillusioned with that, like with a lot of things, because no matter who got into office, and no matter how much complaining was done, very little changed. And when there were threats of people who didn't see the world that way that I did, or had different values, or wanted to govern in a way that I thought was destructive, got into power, and there was a lot of hand-wringing and threats of stuff going horribly wrong. It really didn't go as bad as everybody expected it to be. And so eventually just kind of got burned out on it all. And as like laying down a lot of things, I laid down putting my hopes and dreams in the right politician, or the right kinds of politicians, or the right political party finally getting into office to make everything better.
Would you say that the timeline for laying that down was around the same time as you laying down some of the religious upbringing?
Certainly a lot of overlap there. Yeah, the two were definitely intertwined.
Okay.
Yeah. Just putting hope in things being ordered a certain way. And so the religious context was you'd use phrases like the kingdom of God on earth, or if God has his way, or if there's a revival or some sort of realignment of values and systems and goals, and then everything will be better. And then politically, there's the same promise. There's the same hope. And a lot of times, whether it's on the left or the right, if you just can get your guys in to do the things, or your gals, or your some other genders into the, the space to do the thing that you're hoping for, wishing for, that align with your values, then things will be better. And that was a hope I held on to for a long time until I finally began to see the futility of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just kind of backed out. Took some big steps back as a way to give myself some distance from that, maybe obsession, or
and maybe some. Do you think some of the maybe times that you had? What you said, not dabbled in, but looked into nihilism, helped with that as well, as far as like none of this matters anyways, so why care about following a certain politician or a certain party?
Yeah, to some degree. It's a part of it. Nihilism, if you're experiencing that or practicing isn't really a word, because it's...
I know, I didn't know how to...
state it. Embracing the reality of nihilism. It's looking at it, not ignoring it, maybe. I kind of think of nihilism as it's sort of like it's the shadow that follows all of us. We don't really make it happen or not make it happen. We can just choose to look at it or not look at it. Just like you can ignore your shadow on the ground, or you can stare at it, and you can overemphasize it or focus on it to a degree that you don't see anything else around you. So the more one focuses on nihilism, the less obviously any of this matters, and vice versa. I also think of it like it was a necessary, kind of had to go cold turkey, like somebody that might have an addiction to a substance, an alcoholic or a drug addict or a smoker or something like that. For a lot of people, when they finally decide they're not going to engage in that activity anymore, they can't even do a little bit, just one drink is too much and one hit is too much. So in order to, because that was such a big part of their lifestyle for so long, it's important that they don't hardly do any or any at all, just completely cut it off. And so I'm somebody that hasn't had a problem with alcohol or substance abuse. And so to engage in some of those things from time to time isn't something I feel like I have to be very careful about or rigid about, or never do it because I could slip back into it again. However, when it comes to putting my hope in politics, I have a lot more I feel like I have to be a lot more careful with that, because I think I was kind of an addict in, gorging myself on all the political drama and all the expectations and hopes and dreams, and vilifying the other side, and making, it all about our side and our party and our goals and our values. And so it's hard for me to know how to engage in it in a healthy way. Just like it might be hard for somebody that's had substance abuse issues to engage in that substance in a healthy way, even though for others it's okay. And so I don't have any ill will or judgment to people that do, engage with politics, and just it's not something I've been able to really do much since then. So I don't follow a whole lot. There's always a drama, always a story, always stuff shaking up and happening, and so I'll get maybe some of the big picture stories and some of the headlines. But as far as going into the details and trying to sort out who did what, or who said what, or who's on what side of what issue, or the best person for the job, and I'm leaving that to other people for this season in my life, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So I felt like the January 6th events, I have a certain perspective on it that I thought I could offer, and I know you have a perspective as well, based on the amount of, input that we've spent on it as far as understanding it or researching it or following it. So for me, it has been during the events as they unfolded, I remember, I think we were in the same office together.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah.
We used to work together and heard about it. And there was it was kind of on the news, and we're watching it in real time and kind of commenting together about it, watching it unfold from whatever news source we were seeing, maybe a couple different news sources. And JT was there too. And we were all kind of talking about it. And then I have a acquaintance friend who was actually there at the rally, riot, insurrection, depending on how you classify it.
Were they at the Capitol or at the memorial?
I believe at the Capitol.
Okay.
To my knowledge, I can almost say with 100% certainty they did not do anything illegal, go into the Capitol or anything like that. But they were part of the march, the rally, the protest.
Okay.
And I remember we even texted him or something. JT's closer friends with him than I am, but it's kind of like giving a little bit of a hard time, like, hey, you guys, hopefully you guys aren't the ones breaking windows or something like that, Oh,
gosh.
And they said, no, absolutely, we're just peacefully watching from a distance or something like that. So,
which I think I've heard from some of those people that were breaking the windows say the same thing.
Well, see, there you go. Maybe they were. I don't know. That's why I said I could say with almost absolute certainty.
Right.
Yeah. Which is...
But they were safe.
Yeah. They didn't profess any engagement in the illegal activities of that day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a fun thing about this. One of the kind of the bigger stories that I'm looking forward to talking about this is just the stories that we tell ourselves and what really happened, and how can we trust anybody's version of events based on somebody else's version of events.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get to that. But for now, just giving you my take on it up to this point was that day, and then hearing some of the headlines and some of the as stuff came out over the ensuing week or so. Obviously, everybody's trying to figure out what happened and who was at fault, and what was the responsibility of different parties. And so I remember hearing a lot of that, just again, the big picture, the headlines, not following it too intently for the reasons I said earlier. And then not a whole lot since then. Some stuff's come out. There's been trials. And then the other day, I think it was yesterday, actually, I just started really going back to it again and saying, okay, it's been 3 years. There's been a lot of time for people to sort things out in ways that they maybe couldn't during the first few weeks or the first months as all the dust was settling. And so let me reacquaint myself with the story that encapsulates this. What's the narrative? What's the prevailing, opinion about how this has all went down? But between, like I said, within that first month and yesterday, I haven't intentionally tried to find out much of any information about it. It's just stuff I've heard in passing or, seen without going after it myself. So relatively uninformed on the details up until recently, yesterday. And then yesterday was going through a timeline on a Wikipedia page, which is very detailed. I don't know if you pulled it up yet or not. Yeah. Uh-huh. And it has a site's like 365 different sources for their timeline of events leading up to, during, and following all the activities. And so to me, this felt like I could go read 365 different news articles, or I could find a place that has kind of condensed it and gathered and aggregated it. And obviously there's a I don't say a slant or an agenda, but somebody had to make decisions about what things to include and what things not to include, even in the Wikipedia citations. So there's always a filtering, no matter who you talk to or where you go.
Wikipedia, I think, though, being a little bit different in that there's not much oversight in that the 8 billion people on this planet can all add to it.
Right. Versus a news source that has an editor and quality control people.
Correct.
Professionals whose jobs depend on trying to get it right. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and stay out of legal trouble. And I would think what we all hope is for them to have some ethical journalism and integrity and doing it correctly to find out the truth. So if they have a source to, the good ones would be double checking that source and verifying it with their editorial and legal team to be able to decide whether it was something that they wanted to publish.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, in my opinion, I think Wikipedia needs to be taken with a large grain of salt.
Gotcha.
I would say maybe unless somebody doing the research was on Wikipedia and went to every single one of those citations to go take a look at to see where that's coming from. I mean, some of them are like from people's books and things like that. And then they're from all different websites for it.
Right.
And then you got to verify that what they summarized in the Wikipedia is actually a true representation of a summary of what was even on the article. Maybe it was a Huffington Post article, but it didn't, maybe the person who added that portion to Wikipedia really only read the headline, didn't read the article.
Didn't go into the content.
I'm not saying that that's what it was, and I didn't do any verification on that Wikipedia page that she sent me, but
yeah. And then it's another topic that I don't really think we can come up with an answer for. It's one to think about is, at some point we're all trusting somebody or something or some version somewhere. So we get to decide how much do we want to trust, or how deep do we want to go, or how many objections do we want to have before we have to just move on with our lives. And if Wikipedia is not a place to stop and there's more to do, then there's more to do. And eventually we go, okay, that's as close as I'm going to get, or as much as I can have capacity for. So that's a good point. What would you say, Daniel, kind of your, what's a summary of your exposure to the events of January 6th? You kind of had the same start as I did, because we were in the same office together. So did you follow it the rest of the day, going home, following days? Have you been like...
I think there was a large pause in the information that was given, partly, in my opinion, because of the investigative congressional committee looking into it. And so shortly after January 6th, 2021, I don't know, I would say now maybe a month or two, it seemed like there was a lot of information. And then I don't know, at one point they actually had a committee charged with investigating the events of that. And I mean, it seems like that took like a year or more for it. Obviously with, they kind of finished it, and then that's where some of the charges came out against Trump, and then a lot of other people.
Yeah, a lot of individuals.
Yeah. Both in his staff, and then also people that were there for it.
Actually doing the event actions.
Yeah, that were a part of whatever it was. So I would say, like, during that time, that committee time, I wasn't very much vested in it, because it also wasn't what was on the headlines and the news and what everybody was talking about.
There's other things going on.
Because they were gathering all that information. And so then as it started, some of the charges started happening, specifically around Trump on the indictments and things like that. I would say I started picking it up more and paying attention to news and articles and things like that. I am not a professor of January 6th. I don't know much about it as far as the specifics or timeline or what exactly happened. But I know a good chunk, and I would say that the chunk that I have looked into and identified and learned about it, I try to do kind of in any searching that I do. We were talking about health and fitness right before this, before we got on air.
Right.
Kind of my Enneagram 6. When I get interested about something, my personality really likes to deep dive into all of that information. And so when I get excited about something, I really enjoy doing a lot of research and wanting to try to gather all that information. So reviewing many different views, hearing different politicians speak on it, them being interviewed on it from both sides, taking a look at more left-leaning or more right-leaning websites and news agencies to kind of see what the narrative and what has been spoken about it on either side. I always like to see, anytime looking at like an article, I always like to look at what's the date, because I find oftentimes people will repost, like even on social media or TikTok or anything. It's like a year or two old, like the article is. So I like to look at that. I like to look for it to see if it's an opinion piece, because there's a lot of news articles on the Google internet web that are from some big name newspapers or publishers, but aren't met with the same type of editorial checking and referencing and scrutiny, because they can simply put an opinion tag on there, and then they don't have much legal recourse in that. Obviously, if it's defamation or something, that's a different story. But so I always look for that. I look for, okay, where am I going? What is this? Is this organization typically, what side do they tend to lean on? So I can kind of know, okay, they're going to more so hire those types of journalists that are leaning that way as well with them.
Right.
And so there's going to be a little bias there, like we talked about last time. So who it is, where it's coming from, what I think maybe the agenda would be, and then the opinion, and then the date. And then reading the information in the article, I'm always looking to see what could someone gain by giving false information in this article. So again, I do that with health and fitness. Oh, are they trying to sell me a supplement? So you spend 3 minutes watching their video, and then at the end they're like, oh, and this product that I happen to sell was going to fix all that for you. I'm not going to take any of that, not even with a grain of salt, just throw it all out. So yeah, there's my long answer of kind of where I'm at with that. It interests me because I like to follow along kind of events that are taking place, that are shaping, that are making decisions that are being made. I like seeing court cases that go to the Supreme Court, which ones they decide to hear, which ones they decide not to hear. Kind of like what we were talking about in text message about this, since most of us, citizens of the United States, are playing by the rules of a game bound by the Constitution, we hold that as ethical and law. Right. Then it's going to decisions that are based off of the interpretation of that document often, and a lot of times, affect all of us in a lot of different ways. And if not now, shortly down the future. Right. So for me, like even them doing their investigative work on January 6th and then them going and indicting Trump on it, that will have and could have an impact on me personally, as far as if or if not, he becomes a president or is allowed to become president. Just as much as it would affect me if Biden becomes president, in my opinion, because I think that there's we've prescribed the game that we play. We have given those people power to make decisions over us that affect us. So, anyways.
Yeah, definitely plenty of good reasons to be informed. And I appreciate that you bring that more informed about this topic and most political topics to this conversation than me.
Well, I don't think I'm better or worse than you for doing that investigative. And I don't think somebody is lazy or is being detrimental to themselves or other people by not doing that work. Like, we don't want to. Great.
Different people get different options.
Yeah.
You're not championing that everybody needs to be as politically educated as possible. Okay. Yeah. And I certainly am not saying it's a bad thing to be involved in it unless it's unless you're an addict.
Yeah.
A recovering addict. Like I would say, to some degree I am. I don't know that it's forever either. I know what happens inside when I get too far into it. And I was like, I don't think I want to do that right now. I don't want to play that game. So yeah, that's good. So I wanted to, like, one of the things I think has always bugged me about it, and it helped to dig more into the details, especially now that we have more information available, like you said, because of the investigations, because of the time that's passed. It's a little bit of a double-bladed sword, and we talked about this on the two different types of biases that were similar last time. There was one that says that you tend to favor and give more value to the data that happens first. And then the other one was almost like the other side of the coin, was the bias that you tend to overvalue information that you heard most recently. And those two things could be different. And so it was interesting to kind of examine those biases from where thinking about the gap that's happened for, the 3-year gap from when I first was exposed to the events. And I made some judgments about it based on that first information I got. And then I did additional research on it to see all the things that have transpired in the intervening time frame. And then I started to go, well, I'm going to actually value some of the more recent information higher, because it's new things that have come to light. It's stuff that we didn't know about back then. And there's been enough time and enough investigation and enough testimony to try to piece together a string of events or a narrative that was very unclear early on. And so just kind of noticing, I had my initial biases because they were first, and now I've got some biases because it's more recent and because it seems to be more substantive. One of the initial biases, which was mentioned in the Wikipedia article somewhat dismissively, well, in a way to say that it was, poppycock from the beginning, was that there was a report put out by, I want to say it was picked up by the Wall Street Journal, or I'll see if I can find it here. It's not really important, but it was a somewhat reputable news organization that...
We need Jamie to pull it up for us.
I know. Someday. It's in this Wikipedia article, but it's very long, so
you're fine.
I did not highlight all these. It reported that a technology company had used facial recognition software to determine that some of the people who breached the Capitol were Antifa. How do you say it? Do you say Antifa or Antifa?
I think naturally I would just say Antifa.
Antifa. Okay. That's how I've heard people who talk about this a lot say it. It always sounds like, because it's short for anti-fascist. So I always think anti-fa. So I say Antifa, but other people say Antifa.
I've never heard it called that.
You've never heard it my way. So no. Yeah, I'm just special. Special with a capital S.
For Steven.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. Anyway, so that's not the point. The point is that supposedly this was in the first 24 hours of the events breaking, that some facial recognition software had been picked up that they were basically people who would be on the other side of the political spectrum that had infiltrated these protests, and then were more or less the ringleaders, antagonists, yes, who stormed the Capitol. And the report seemed valid, and so it got picked up by a reasonably reputable source and then propagated like wildfire. And for people like myself, to some degree, who didn't think that was an impossibility, or maybe are willing to consider options that are outside of the narrative, or want to feel smart because I know something that other people don't know, or something like that. And for whatever reason, that seemed like a plausible explanation, or at least one that needed to be examined in the light of everything else. However, upon reading it now, 3 years later, it looks like that was dismissed within a day or two as being false and made up. And
so you're saying you heard that back then?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, initially.
Okay.
Within the first couple of days, it was one of the overarching sort of highlights that I didn't dig into or do a lot of investigation about, but it came through, and there was a season, a blip, where that was part of the narrative, that the facial recognition technology had unequivocally confirmed that there were people who had infiltrated an otherwise right-wing conservative protest and then instigated and antagonized the crowd to then go and do the illegal and destructive acts. And so it was like, they call it a false flag event, where people do things to hurt the other side by making it look like it was them. And so I don't think I necessarily said for sure that's what it is, but it definitely raised some skepticism that what we were being told about how everything went down might not be as clear-cut as it was. So that was a bias I had, I think, based on the first information I heard about it. Oh, yeah, that's what it is. And I think I held that for a while because I never heard the follow-up headline that, no, actually, that was false. And so I kept...
false, the information now is that there was not facial recognition being done to prove that there was Antifa.
Right.
But not information to prove that there was not Antifa there.
Correct. Okay. Correct. Yeah. So I've not heard it. If there was, I have not heard it. I don't know that you could prove that everybody who acted illegally was doing so on behalf of, that cause. So there still could be false flags or infiltrators or people who were there, agitators who were there to advance the opposite agenda to make that particular side look bad. That's still a possibility. But it doesn't hold as much. You can't prove it did or you can't prove it didn't happen. So it's just speculation. But when I had heard it, it was more than speculation.
Yeah.
It was fairly, they had supposedly some evidence for it. So it was just a great example to me from my own experience to see how you can kind of gravitate. And I didn't push too hard because it fit, oh yeah, that makes sense. Not because I think everybody associated with Antifa is corrupt or, has ill intentions. It's just, I could see extreme ideologues on either side of this, chasm doing things like that to help their cause. And so again, not everybody on the right is bad. Not everybody on the left is bad. Yeah. And there's malicious actors on each side, people who would do just about anything to advance their cause. And it doesn't take many, as we saw from those events. It doesn't take a lot of people to have some pretty radical ideas to cause some big disruptions.
Yeah.
So then, and looking at it today, that only seems to be, that idea only seems to be living on as an artifact of the original misinformation that was getting spread during the first few days of everybody trying to figure out what happened. There was just a lot of confusion, a lot of people trying to sort things out.
Yeah, I sent you an article as well.
I pulled it up. I was scrolling through it a little bit.
That what I appreciated about that one, and we'll link both of these in the description of the podcast as well for this episode.
Thank you.
What I appreciated about this one when I was doing some research yesterday and today was just kind of just seeing the sheer chaos and number of agencies, both federal and news agencies, with all very limited amount of information and unable to accurately collect and disseminate and put together. It makes sense why it took them freaking year or two to do the investigative report for me. And I'm not saying that they, at the end of this committee's investigation, found all of the truth or most of the truth. It's just they got all the information that they felt they could get from it and had enough to be able to move forward with making some decisions. So anyways, it was very eye-opening to see, because they do a lot of color coding on this website for each of the agencies, and you can kind of see the public requests and phone calls that are made between different divisions, and reports from the Secret Service about notating how many people are where and what's happening at different times. And just to think that there's like, I think even just because of the nature of it, it's not like there was this event and then you had this hierarchy agency that was in control of managing the entire process. Like it's like, and then it was all over the place. I mean, we're talking about two really big distinctive locations with the Washington Monument versus the Capitol. And then the calling for the march from the monument to the Capitol. But you already had people at the Capitol. And so even just like I was looking up, doing Googling this morning just of how many people were injured in January 6th. That is a cluster mess of even just trying to figure out who was injured. I mean, there's like, because there's like statements from some congressional people that were in office then and still are. You can see their tweets or their quotes about, say, 10 people getting killed on that day. And then you do some looking into it, and it's like, there was 2 heart attacks. There was 4 suicides days and weeks later that were counted in that. Like there was, and then I think they went from 80 or 90 Capitol Police being injured, which is always kind of a nebulous word too. Like, what are we talking about? Like, did they get a bruise? Did they break a nail? Did they lose a nail? A limb? Did they get shot? And it went from 80 or 90, and it's like up to like now, I think they're claiming is 140.
Wow.
And again, like even that, like, okay, well, those are medical records. So like how much actual verification can we even get on, how many Capitol Police were injured for that?
Which is a relatively small detail in the scope of the whole net of things that happened. Not insignificant to those individuals, but in piecing together the story, it's just one tiny detail.
It is one detail. I think the reason for me why I felt like it could be important in a bigger detail is surrounding some of the narratives that I've heard come from the right, is that it was a peaceful demonstration. And so if you have somebody from the right who is not stating the Antifa narrative, but was just stating, it was peaceful, it was fine, they just walked around. I've heard a lot that it was, that there's videos of the Capitol Police like doing a guided tour, they call it, around the Capitol. And so like people on the right are arguing and putting up saying they weren't even being stopped from going in there. Once they got in there, nobody cared, and then they were allowed to do everything. And so if that's the narrative that side is pushing, it would be advantageous for the left to make it seem like it was the worst attack in the entire world. 10 people died. All these people got hurt. It was this huge thing, to make it seem very grave. And so then it is. So that anyways, that's why I think it's a little bit of a piece that makes
sense.
That helps kind of shed some light or truth onto like, okay, what are we describing this as? Kind of like you said before, like what is it? What was it? What happened? What would you call it? I mean, insurrection too is like just the most broad word in the entire world too. If you just simply go to the definition in the dictionary, it's all it is a violent uprising against an authority or government. Right. So it's an uprising, but it doesn't have to conclude to anything. So just the start of it is the insurrection. And that's violent. So again, a little bit more to, who got injured there.
How do you define violence? Maybe too.
Right. So if you define violence as breaking and entering, going where you're not allowed to, destroying property, and then also injuring people. Insurrection is, I mean, if we all agree that that's what those definitions of those words mean, insurrection is what happened on that day. There was a uprising against an authority or government, and it was also violent.
It was violent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's been a sticking point, as I mentioned to you, like a sticking point for me that I think unfairly clouded discussion about it, simply because from my perspective, it was a word that was attached to the events that carries a lot of baggage to it. And I don't think it's wholly inappropriate either. I'm not completely disagreeing with you. I think I would just add a little nuance to it, maybe in the technical definition. Yes. And obviously we don't just look at words technically. They carry some weight to them, or some association with how they're used, or in what context they're used, or what they're doing. You know, they aren't just descriptors. They have some history to them, that sort of thing. So depending on, which of those.
Well, yeah. And exactly. And I think, you look at like, okay, if there's a demonstration, a march, a rally, it's kind of like, well, when does it become a riot? And would any of those times that we've had any of those in the past, if someone simply takes a rock and is throwing it at the police, is that now entire event and all of those people, are they now a part and have committed an insurrection against the U.S. government?
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. It's a question of scale. It's a question of spectrum. It's a question of,
I think, and because the definition that we're using for the word is, I mean, like short. It's just a violent uprising against an authority or government. And you're like, well, goodness, like the only thing that really helps us is violent. I mean, if it was just uprising against authority, that would be really hard. But so the violent adds a little bit to it. But yeah, to what scale is, like, what's the difference between a riot and an insurrection? You know, I mean, you don't really have rioters like against just Walmart, so they are doing it against the authority, like the government, for it. And then you can take all of that and then go, oh, well, it's one could say, oh, it's very convenient that also the word insurrection is in the Constitution. Oh, and that would be if we didn't want this person to get into office, how's a way that we could not get them into office? Oh, well, they wouldn't be able to do it if they were part of an insurrection. Oh, so now if we call this an insurrection, whether it is or isn't, that helps their case to be able to do what states have already done, like Colorado
did, yeah.
I think there's 2 or 3 other ones that are right now that have done it at the same thing.
Yeah.
So,
which it sounds like that may end up getting overturned. I don't know.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's because the Constitution didn't clarify even how to come to that conclusion that somebody was involved in that.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can see an agenda there, is what you're saying.
One could argue that there was that. Like,
right.
If you thought about, okay, obviously I would think from people that are, I would say the authorities on the far left, so not Joe Blow in Montana. Right. The authorities on the far left, I think, absolutely had an agenda and a desire to ensure that Trump didn't get put in office even prior to January 6, 2021.
Right.
And so if it's coming up to it, and then you're like, oh, sweet.
Here's an opportunity.
This is a perfect opportunity.
Yeah, it's possible.
It could be that's there. I mean, that's what I'm kind of saying. It's like one side or the other. Like, it does match. The definition does match what happened that day. And at the same time, it also serves to benefit the side that does not want that person there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all good. And again, we don't know anything. We're just having fun. Like, slap the word opinion on this whole conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So breaking down the word insurrection, I think, is important for all the reasons you said, and because it the implications beyond just the people who actually perpetrated the events. So like you said, if you're in a crowd and you're, protesting peacefully and one person throws a bottle at a police officer or something like that, there is a line at which you're guilty by association, and that's just part of the world we live in, and one of the games that we play and the stories that we tell ourselves. What I didn't realize at the time, I don't remember realizing this at the time when I first watched the events, and maybe this is obvious to you and anybody else who's followed it, was that they were certifying the electoral votes in the Capitol building while the breach happened. And so you can see how it looked, and it was probably the intent of some of those who went in as an opportunity to disrupt the flow of government, which I think puts you more into the insurrection category.
100%.
Yeah. If it had just
that's what I'm saying. I'm not doing that the definition. Yeah, for that one.
And we're certainly not here to say it was or it wasn't. We're just, speculating. On one hand, it's a tough word to define, and the Constitution doesn't give us a good definition to use. And on the other hand, there's some things that point to if it had just been another day where just normal business was being conducted, and people just were like, I'm fed up with the government. Let's go smash some windows into maybe some people.
And I think that too lends to probably some of the desire for people that were defending the actions of January 6th to believe that there was a false flag event, meaning people planted there, people that didn't have the same agenda. They were just wanting to get the people on the right in trouble.
Right.
The reason I think that is because I remember seeing cell phone videos of people saying, wanting to cause harm to the people, the congressional people that were in office.
Yeah.
And so not just simply, we want to protect our freedom and we want to save the US. It was, we're going to go attack, like a lot of them were like Pelosi, and we want to go and do harm. And if Pence isn't going to change this, we're going to come back.
He's a bad guy too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, which again lends more credence to it. Yes, it being an insurrection with what those people are saying. So then I absolutely see if you're dead set on thinking that it was a peaceful thing or it was beneficial to the U.S., then those people that were saying that, they were FBI or they were Antifa or something like that.
Right.
I can see the value of that and where you'd want to go with that from it. But again, like you said, and like we were talking about as far as sources, that's so dang hard to go really truly figure out if that person was or wasn't.
Yeah.
Right? Like we don't.
Yeah.
The verification of that.
Even if we have cell phone video evidence, that can be misinterpreted. Could be context missing, or again, not to defend criminal activities or anything like that, but just to speak to the vagueness of it. Or to say, you mentioned people who say, hey, it was just a peaceful, we were getting a tour and people let us in and that sort of thing. That could have also been happening in a different spot, because this wasn't all happening in one physical location. Yeah. There were multiple pockets of events happening all within minutes of each other. Some of it very, very violent and very scary. And some of it, people could have been there and walked away and gone home that day and not known anything bad happened. You know? So there was just so many different pieces of the puzzle happening simultaneously in different parts and different perspectives. And you turned your back and didn't see this thing or didn't see that thing. And for obvious reasons, the majority of what was shown on the news for the, ensuing time period was the sensational things and the highlights and the big news and the catastrophes, and those all warrant being exposed. I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong. It's just it was self-selected out that we didn't get other events that were happening. And so when somebody says, well, I was there and it wasn't violent, they aren't necessarily wrong.
Right.
They're just telling you what they saw, what they experienced, what their story was. And so both can be true.
Yeah. If they are intentionally wanting to tell the truth.
Right. Sure.
Statement,
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Which would require you to have some faith and trust in them.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I can imagine. I mean, if there's 10,000 people there, you think of like a stadium or a concert or something like that. Like, yeah, a lot of those back half people aren't looking at Twitter. You know, they might just be like, "Oh, what was going on? We have to get out of here. Oh, why is everybody kicking us out? Oh, it's just getting too big. Oh, that government. Oh,
yeah, exactly.
You would have no idea if you were, if
you're not live streaming,
right?
And then you see Trump saying, "Continue to respect the police and act lawfully." Some of the tweets that come out, assuming that you're looking at your phone, waiting for a tweet from Trump, which it's reasonable to expect a lot of those folks were. And then you're like, why? What's the problem? We're being respectful. We can see some commotion up ahead, but it's too far away to even really know what's going on. So it's a completely different experience for maybe the majority of the people in the crowd versus the agitators and the rioters and the insurrectionists, or whatever label we want to put them, the people that were actively engaged in illegal, criminal, harmful, violent activity, which I don't know the numbers. Again, I could be wrong about this. It seems like it was a very small minority compared to the large crowd that was gathered there for the rally, for the march, for the...
As far as who was being violent?
As far as, who actually attacked, infiltrated the Capitol.
I have no idea.
Yeah, okay. Which certainly doesn't make it right. It just it's another, factor to consider in all this, that I think part of the word insurrection for me, and what I see that's been attempted to be pinned on Trump, and I'm not here to say whether it should or shouldn't be pinned on him, because I don't have all the facts. I haven't been exposed to all the testimony. Insurrection to me implies coordinated intent. And I know there's some evidence of planted weapons and pipe bombs, and there were guns that were found stashed around the Capitol and that sort of a thing. None of which were really used.
And could have been placed there by
people,
any side.
Flags. Sure, to make it look bad. So one of the conclusions I got while I was reading through the timeline was, if this was an attempted insurrection, it was a pretty crappy, execution of it, which doesn't make it any less of an insurrection just because they did a terrible job at it. It just doesn't have the earmarks of a coordinated, intentional, we're going to go to Washington or we're going to storm the Capitol and attack it.
And do you feel that it's required to be planned and ahead of time to be an insurrection?
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. In my definition, which isn't in the technical definition, which we've agreed is very general, not very specific. I don't know if it just doesn't seem like a crowd getting rowdy and behaving illegally and deadly in some cases, not all, but violently, to say the least, qualifies as an insurrection. I don't know. To me, that word just feels a little bit more intentional, a little bit more coordinated, a little bit more like we're going in and we know what we're doing and we know what the risks are. The story we have around the founding fathers standing up to the King of England. It wasn't an instant thing. It wasn't a rash decision. It was planned out for a long time. They understood the risks. At least that's what we're told. And they performed an insurrection against England. That's how our country was founded.
Yeah.
So yeah. Is there an insurrection that could just be a little bit more flash in the pan? And there probably were groups there. The Proud Boys comes up a lot.
Yeah. There was a lot of Proud Boys.
Yeah. And maybe other far right extremist groups who aren't afraid of violence and do see violence as a necessary means to promote their agenda, which we're not defending it by any stretch of the imagination, who could have had more of what I would say a classical definition of insurrection in mind when they went to the Capitol. Right. So they may have been planning this all along.
Which if either one of us decided to take them time to investigate, one could possibly find that, in fact, those are the people who did get charged.
Right.
Because I would agree with you. Like the there's probably even a good amount of the people that actually even entered the Capitol that had no plan to do anything like that day.
That's my hunch.
It was just kind of like, oh, opportunity strikes. I'm right here. And somebody just busted that window out. Hell yeah. Freedom.
Exactly. Yeah. We've seen the fervor that gets struck up at a sports game or a concert or a rally where, you're caught up in the moment. And so certainly you don't get caught up in the moment and do those kind of actions if you don't have that story already brewing in your heart, as it were, or in your mind. You don't go from just being a passive, I don't know what I think about this, to storm the Capitol, So you've brought some of that with you already, some disgruntledness, some frustration, some they're stealing our country, whatever the motivation was.
Right. Well, and about the insurrection too, as far as being a little bit more detailed and specific in the definition of it, of your thoughts. The 14th Amendment and that, like, Section 2 even and Section 3, which talks about this, was because of the Civil War.
Pretend I don't know what that is. Would you mind just...
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Amendment 14 actually has 5 sections to it that talks about it for that article. Basically, the 5th one just says the Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article, whatever that means. But Section 3, I'll read it really quick, just says no person shall be a senator, representative, Congress, president or vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature, blah, 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 to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So Congress could vote to say, okay, yes, this person has been charged with insurrection, or not charged, sorry, this person did engage in insurrection.
Right.
We're going to remove that, and they can then take office. This was all after and because of the Civil War.
As a way to penalize the Confederate.
To ensure that they weren't going to be taking office of the U.S. afterwards, because their values didn't theoretically align with the controlling, prevailing people that were the winners that were there.
Right.
So they were basically saying, yeah, okay, if 2/3 of us agree that you weren't that bad and you were kind of blah, 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 but you're going to be still helpful for us, you can come here.
Yeah.
But the problem is nowhere in the amendment or anywhere else does it say how someone's going to have been identified that they engaged in insurrection. So there's no they have to be charged in a court, or they have to be committed, or Congress has to vote on it. Nothing. It just says
very vague.
Very vague. And so that's to your point earlier about whether the Colorado or the other states will be able to keep him off of it from there. From what I've seen, it's just the Secretary of State's making those decisions based on reading
their interpretation.
Just reading that, okay, Trump engaged in insurrection, and so he can't be on the ballot, and we're taking him off the ballot. It's crazy.
It is. Well, to that point, this was another thing I was curious about your opinion in. One of the big fallouts, maybe the biggest fallout from these events, other than prosecuting and convicting the actual actors that did the crimes physically in that space, which we might call small potatoes or small fish. The big fish is obviously Donald Trump. And so the big question is, I'm curious your take on this. Is Donald Trump responsible for those events that happened that day?
Oh, I think that's one of the most interesting pieces of this entire puzzle.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it goes deeper than simply maybe, I think one of the prevailing or widely talked about reasons for why he would be included in responsible for the insurrection is that that he didn't tell them not to do it. for it.
Now, that's an argument that the other side's making, or that you agree with, or both, or?
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. That is what has been the main point for just kind of the headline news of why he should be indicted and held responsible is because he didn't send a tweet out to tell them. He didn't go over national news and tell them to go home, tell them not to do it.
Right. More of the inaction than that.
Yeah. There was one action that is kind of tied with it, of his statement when he was at the podium, because he was also, after he was out of the podium, it was like a 2.5 or 3 hour gap before he finally did send the tweet to tell them,
right,
the Capitol Police are on our side, be nice to them, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Law and order.
And so, yeah, I think so that is what's there. What I have looked into prior to us talking about this, and then yesterday and today, is that, and this may have been, kind of the topic that we were talking about earlier, like those two things were what was the big narrative at the time. And then as more information got brought up over the next 2 years, to find out the actual emails, text messages, and phone call conversations that happened days leading up to the events,
right?
Closed door meetings that happened in December, that, if true, in my opinion, lead to a view of a concerted effort by very powerful people in his cabinet and on the far right of authority. So the high level people, that it wasn't. Again, if all that information that has been discovered is true and accurate, it very much leads to that's not just Trump not reacting or reacting poorly to an event that just happened to happen out of nowhere. A lot of evidence points that they were wanting this to happen, knew it was going to happen, and were hoping for it to happen. Again, from the information that's being released, and that information is being communicated primarily by people that are opposing Donald Trump. So it's not like Fox News came out and was like, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff that Trump was doing beforehand to get to here. So I recognize that and understand that information, even if we are identifying that its source and its information, it is coming from one side that definitely has a narrative and an idea and a desire for that to have been the actual truth for it. And at the same time, it's almost kind of like what I talked about with the ancient civilizations. There's some weird stuff like that him and his staff and his crew did leading up to it and during it that, in my opinion, doesn't make him put in a good light. As far as what it is,
Raises suspicions, at the very least.
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that they were actively engaged in doing everything they could to dispute the results of the election could be enough to explain all those closed doors meetings and emails and phone calls separate from what happened on January 6th? Or does it seem like that wouldn't be a sufficient enough answer? Just offering
No, I'm possible. I mean, anything's possible. I think, but I think for me, there's some more specific things like this website gets from public records. So they had to go for the Freedom of Information Act, got a whole bunch of documents back that were completely redacted from Secret Service, but still would show, on this day at this time, a day before, Bannon and Trump had a 4-minute phone call, and then that next hour, Bannon on his podcast told his entire crew, told all of his listeners, tomorrow shit's going to go down and it's going to be war. Everybody needs to get ready. So that's some of those things, kind of like the ancient civilizations things, which is like, whoa, we can verify through the Secret Service that phone call took place. We don't know what happened on that phone call, what it was about. And right afterwards, Bannon then goes on his podcast and then says all that. So again, we don't have near enough information to put together, but I think sites like this and even the Wikipedia putting a lot of those puzzle pieces over the years that have came out could, again, if it's true, shows some evidence to some concerted effort to have this type of a situation happen.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great assessment, a reasonable way to look at it. There's definitely lots of questions, unanswered questions, and a lot of suspicion there around it. Mm-hmm. My slightly uneducated or mostly uneducated opinion about it, or the way that I kind of compile the data that I've exposed myself to, and the story that I create about it, or the narrative that I make, like we've said, is here's how I think it went down in a big picture sort of way. Is there was probably a lot of talk of what do we have to do to somehow disrupt the votes being counted, and there was dispute over the state of Arizona, which I don't know exactly all of that, but I know that was one of the big sticking points, is should they count those votes or not count those votes. And so I can imagine there was talks about how do we stall, how do we disrupt, how do we buy ourselves some more time? There's going to be a rally. What if we get everybody, stirred up into a fever, and maybe there'll be enough disruption happening that things will get delayed, and we'll get more time to try to figure out how to circumvent this legally, or new evidence will come out or something like that. So I could see for the top level strategist here, Trump and whoever he was talking to, Giuliani gets mentioned a lot as part of one of these phone calls. Yep. Along with Bannon and other people. And then the events started happening, I don't want to say organically, but the wheels were set in motion. It wasn't like Trump necessarily gave an order, marching orders, or coordinated with Proud Boys just to grab, a well-known example and said, hey guys, at this time, I want you to do these actions and storm the Capitol and do this and say this. It was sort of like the wheels were put in motion, and the vague orders were dropped through various channels. And then as it started to unfold, I don't get the sense, even looking at timelines that seem to want to paint Trump in the worst light possible, who may be biased, may not be, but it looks like that to me, that's the sort of part of the agenda. Okay. Even with all of that, it doesn't look like Trump, it doesn't look like they can say for sure that Trump knew how bad it had gotten or what the results were. He wasn't, I don't see him as, this again, my opinion, my conjecture, my narrative. He didn't have eyes inside the Capitol watching all this unfold in real time to be able to say, good, yes, they are causing so much trouble, and he had the chance to pull him out, and he didn't. And that's sort of, like you said, some of the accusation is that his lack of telling people to stand down or to back off was where he was complicit in the violence that happened. I think that's given him too much credit, in a sense, to say that he was actively watching. And I get the sense that he knew things were being disrupted and that he liked that. I don't put that past him. I think that he hoped that the disruption and the chaos that was being caused would advance his cause of somehow finding a way to not have the election, quote unquote, stolen from him. I'm not saying it was. I don't necessarily believe it was, but that was the narrative that he was operating under at that time. So in retrospect, I think it's easier to say, well, when people started dying and glass started breaking, and, he should have just been like, hang on, guys, everybody stop, but I can also imagine a scenario where the amount of information he was being given was still consistent with his end goal of causing disruption. And so he didn't want it to stop until it became so obvious that it wasn't not only not affecting the goal that he wanted, but it had gotten out of hand. And at whatever point he determined, that's when he finally got on and said, everybody needs to go home. But I guess there's also no way to know for sure if he would have had enough control to stop it at any point.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things too that I had mentioned was talking about that I thought that there was something that an action he did do, and I just pulled it up of him at 12 o'clock before they marched from there to the Capitol, from the memorial to the Capitol. He was urging them to go to the Capitol to demonstrate peacefully, but he also exhorted them to act. He said, in the quote, "If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is part of his, the enigma of Trump's rhetoric is like, yeah, obviously, what did he mean fight like hell? A lot of people say that was dog whistling to radical, violent extremist groups who knew, okay, that's our green light to go in and do by any means necessary.
Right.
But then he adds the word peaceful so he can claim, hey, I didn't exonerate anybody to do anything violent. I said peaceful. So like double speak.
Yeah.
And the people who really knew what they were supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem like to you, like that's a pretty clear indictment of him? Just from your personal opinion, like, do you feel like that was him?
I think in my personal opinion, I think with the limited information and research that I have done on this relative to like the committee's information and research, I don't think that there's enough evidence that has been shown to show that he violated the 14th Amendment, Section 3, as being insurrecting against the government. I think there's enough evidence, and I would agree that some of those people rightfully so should have been, and I'm glad that they were convicted of insurrection, of some insurrection crimes, for what they did do, because we subscribe, like I said in the beginning, to ourselves to the same game of the Constitution. Well, if you're not allowed to go in there, you're not allowed. You're breaking and entering has consequences in this game that we're playing,
and they're bigger consequences at the Capitol.
Right. And regardless of what side you're on or what political view you have, if it doesn't matter what side was doing that, that should be taken care of. I think that's beneficial. To say that Trump engaged in insurrection, specifically according to per the 14th Amendment, Section 3, I think is hard, and he hasn't been charged as that either.
People have seen a lot more evidence than us haven't been able to come to that conclusion either.
Yeah.
Right.
Which makes it very interesting that these Secretary of States are just taking them off the ballot,
just going for it.
Doing it.
Interesting is a good word. Yeah.
So I think I don't know, from what I remember him talking about in the speech. I wasn't watching it. I didn't watch it in its entirety live when he was giving it, when all the events were happening, because we were simultaneously working as well.
Right.
But I don't. He's, in my opinion, he didn't help the situation.
Right.
For it. Him calling for Pence to send the votes back to the states. And even what he was wanting Trump or Pence to do, Pence even admitted years later he didn't even have the constitutional authority to do what Trump was wanting him to do.
Right. Nor did his integrity allow him to either. It was some report I saw.
Well, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's even more important, or even more glaring, that he was just admittedly said, like, this isn't just like a super far left lawyer who's saying, oh, he didn't have the authority to do that. Like Pence is like literally to constituents when he was on the campaign trail. It's just like, I didn't even have that ability. What Trump was wanting me to do, I don't actually. He's like, trust me, I've read the Constitution. Have you? Like, So I don't think he helped in any way. And personally, I would say he was actually hurt the situation and helped make it worse by some of those things. But insurrection. Yeah. I don't see it with all the information I have. Yeah, so far.
And just to clarify, you're saying on some level, for some people, an insurrection did occur on January 6th. You just can't unequivocally say Trump was a part of that insurrection directly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think the evidence shows I think there's quite a bit of evidence that shows that there was intent of people that had entered the building to uprise against authority or a government. And I don't think that deciding whether to punish those people is determined by whether they thought about it beforehand. It's kind of like murder. Yeah. Like you still can get in trouble for all of a sudden just killing somebody. And you tend to get more in trouble if you plan it out for a long time to murder somebody. Yeah. So I again, because we are all subscribing to the game of playing by the Constitution. Right. That's where I'm coming with these from. Yeah.
I like it. I like your definition. I think that resonates with me. And I don't see anything I would challenge or see differently. I think that's a great way to summarize it, to tease out some of the nuances. And I would just like to reiterate for people listening in, our goal isn't to convince anybody about Trump's guilt or not guilt or various people's guilt. We're just hoping that you can see some of the ways that we're wanting to approach the topic and look at it from different angles, and hopefully think about it a little more clearly than some of the rhetoric would suggest, or at least examine one's own biases or personal preferences or opinions. Or if you find yourself resistant or agitated by the things we're saying, then we succeeded to some degree in our goal by hopefully stirring you up to see it from a different perspective. So whether you still think Trump is was guilty, or you think he had absolutely zero culpability in it, that's less the point for us than maybe seeing something that you hadn't seen before would be our goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Love it.
All right. Until next time then.
Until next time.